All right, thank you for the opportunity to visit with you. We have had a lot of discussion individually about this situation, and certainly I have attempted to provide dialogue with you through updates, and have wanted to have the opportunity to really sit and visit with you as a board about this topic. But of course, this will be our first regular board meeting prior to really getting to discuss it. And so I wanted to provide you just an overview and a timeline of really how this topic came about. On the actually, I'm not sure what's happening here. Yeah, can you go to the first slide, please?
Don't make me start over.
Yeah, we got to rewind. That's really weird. All right, thank you so much. So on Friday, August 19th, actually, Ms. Gower was contacted and with a request to visit with me from Presiding Commissioner Angst, and so certainly was wanting to do that, and so was able to do that on Friday afternoon. And at that time, Mr. Angst notified me of the Commission's intent to place an item on the November 8th ballot to reduce the county's surtax. And at that point in time, like most people, surtaxes are not something that you talk about with a lot of regularity. And certainly this surtax and the topic in Missouri is 37 years old. And so it's not really a topic of regular dialogue. So certainly had to do a lot of research and seek to understand what that was about. And so he communicated on Tuesday, on the 23rd, that they would be discussing the topic at the next commission meeting. And so over that weekend, I sought to learn and to study and to review what exactly that meant. Certainly at that time on the 19th, Mr. Angst shared with me that the commission will be looking at reducing the surtax from $1.03 per $100 of assessed value on real commercial property. And so in the course of that conversation, I shared with him my concerns from a school perspective with any loss in revenue of that nature, and told him that I would seek to learn more about that and would be present for the 23rd meeting. And so I attended, and I, of course, had notified you of as many details as I could, and a number of you were present at the meeting on the 23rd, and some additional members from the taxing entities that are affected were present as well. And so the commissioners met and discussed their intent to place this item on the ballot. At this meeting, they had a draft ballot language prepared and presented that or read that during the course of that meeting. And as I said, district representatives and representatives from those other organizations were there and addressed the commissioners, communicating a number of factors to include the wish to be able to understand the impact a little bit better, and wishing that they might have had a little bit more notice of the potential ballot issue. And at that meeting, in attendance from the board, if I'm correct, was Ms. Russell, Mr. O'Neill, Ms. Hess. I believe that was it from the board members. Is that right? So, and at that time, Mrs. Hess shared some comments as well. So on Thursday, the 25th of that same week, they were going to discuss this topic. So I attended that meeting. Actually, it started around 8 or so, and or 8:30 or something to that effect. And they excused me, saying that they were not going to address it until later in that morning. And so I left and returned. And so approximately 10 o'clock that morning, I think it was, they met and had further discussion. And at that meeting, I was given an opportunity to visit with the commission and share with them the concerns that we had just about our inability to even address the topic as a board, for the board to really reflect on this situation and for us to be able to present any sort of impact from that. And at that meeting, I was able to share wholeheartedly the support and value for our commercial partners throughout the community. We celebrated one of them here tonight, and and just asked that the taxing entities that are affected by the surtax be given the opportunity to collaborate and to evaluate the impact and to discuss what an appropriate level might be, suggesting that $1.03 may or may not be the appropriate number. In 1985, the group of stakeholders, one, Dr. Vic Slaughter, superintendent of the Lebanon schools, as well as representatives from the library board, the health department, as well as the road districts are affected as well. And I don't know, but I assume there were city representatives in 1985. Nonetheless, that group met and collaborated around the topic of what should the surtax, a tax on real commercial property, be set at? What should the levy be in order to replace a tax that was going away? And to be clear, certainly through our learning and my dialogue with you, the 1984 M&M, Merchants and Manufacturers Inventory Tax, which was a tax on inventory on stock by those businesses, was taken away by statutory change. And so the loss of that revenue, the replacement of that revenue, was designated to drive what the levy would be. So each county in the state of Missouri set their surtax. And in 1985, it was set in Leclerc County at $1.03. Okay, and so my dialogue on the 25th that morning was to ask, would you be willing to allow the taxing entities to collaborate and to identify perhaps it does need to be reduced? We certainly want to be fair throughout the community with our commercial partners and our residential partners, and allow us to do that. But I acknowledge that there was no way that that collaboration could happen in time to meet their posting deadline for the ballot. And so I made that request, and so on the 30th, the commission met and formally voted and unanimously passed the addition of the surtax, which would move it from $1.03 per $100 of assessed value on commercial real property to 51 cents per $100 of commercial real property. And I think a really important piece for you as a board to know, and certainly one of the core tasks are for you are to approve budgets, and budgets that can effectively meet the educational and operational needs in a school system, and that's why you set the operating and debt service levies every August. That's a part of the responsibilities. And so to understand the overall impact of this for the school system is something that I wanted to be able to discuss with you here. And so one other piece that I think is important as you contemplate that is to talk about who this is for. So it would be important for community members to understand that unless they're an owner of commercial real property, this tax reduction does not affect them. So any perceived tax cut from the M&M surtax will have no positive fiscal benefit unless you earn commercial real property. So I wanted to emphasize those details. And so again, the facts that I wanted to share with you are: one, the 1984 M&M inventory tax. My understanding through dialogue with various folks who were part of that process was that it was difficult to assess those inventory, that it was a challenge, and so statutorily the change occurred, moving from the inventory tax to the tax on real commercial property. So in 85, it was established, and each county set the levy, as I said earlier. And again, to be clear, it was a levy set to replace income lost from the previous inventory tax. And you might ask, well, why aren't all entities recipients? We talked about LEAP as an example. LEAP was not affected because LEAP was not a recipient of the inventory tax in 1984. And so there are also some fire districts and such that are not listed as recipients of the surtax because they were not recipients. And so that's how the list of recipients for the surtax were identified. So the Clee County engaged those taxing entities, and I referred to who they were, and they set it in 1985 at $1.03. Again, to clarify, the surtax is paid exclusively by owners of commercial real property. It's remained unchanged for the past 37 years. And so the library board, the health board, the school board have been budgeting based on these revenues for the past 37 years. And they continue to provide for critical county services. I will note and think it's important as responsible budgeters in the system, and certainly I feel a responsibility to recognize that in a budgetary environment, local effort in our school district has been tremendous because of the passing of Proposition 11 in schools on August 7th of 2018. That was tremendous, and that was our community saying, we want to support our teachers, we want to support facilities, we want to provide safe transportation, and we want to prepare students for their future. That was a very loud and very, very important transition that we had happen in our school system. It was really important. I will say that our local effort was far below the state's level of funding prior to Proposition 11 schools. The state always exceeded. We are at approximately 40, I shouldn't say a specific number, 42, 43% local effort, whereas the state is now lower, right around, and again, in the low 40s. Previously, we were in the 30s for local effort. The state's funding formula, the rate by which we are funded from the state, is relatively flat, especially in these inflationary times. The state adequacy target, the basis by which we receive state funding, has not changed, and this is the 4th consecutive year. Certainly that's a challenge, that's a problem. I celebrate that our local community is taking care of schools because that flat operating funding from the state is a concern. And I'm talking about sustainable ongoing revenue sources. The influx of federal dollars during COVID are not the sustainable ongoing funds. They are one-time revenue, and it is not a good budgetary practice to consider those for a solution of any ongoing expenditure. It would be a bad decision for any of us to budget for those resources, because when they're gone, they will not be replaced. And so we're grateful for the COVID relief funds. They helped us through a very difficult time, certainly in 2020, 21, and they continue to help us to meet some really important needs with early childhood and even supporting overall school safety, as you might see in the Boswell Project. The official state website, which you can look up, it's 24/7 Missouri. It's openforbiz.mo.gov. Is a state of Missouri website, and it communicates the average surtax for the state of Missouri as $1.02. And I know during the course of the commission there was some discussion about whether that number was accurate. And what I can say is that we simply use the state reported numbers. There was a website that was cited that showed it as lower, that was presented at the commission meeting, and it was from a somewhat politically oriented entity that was not related to the state. So they use a weighted versus unweighted, and so I don't have data to refute or to discuss what that was. I know the 51 cents was identified as a number after looking at counties in our surrounding area. What I'll just remind you is that every county is about as different as the day is long. Whether you go to our east and you consider the significant fiscal impact from impact aid through the federal government, and we're very happy to have the port in Pulaski County, and we're very happy that the lake is to our north. When you talk about trying to compare counties, we just are different. Everyone is different. Our $380 million of assessed value compared to over $1.2 billion, one county to our north, shows the disparity or differences that are there. I believe that the folks who made the decision in 1985 made a decision based on facts and analysis, and we were not given the opportunity to do that. I'm concerned from a fiscal standpoint, and I'll share that with you, about the movement down to 51 cents. The Surtax currently produces about $950,000, and that's an approximate range, just shy of $1 million as of January of 22, and that's distributed to the entities that you can see on the screen and that I've mentioned before. In 2021, Lebanon schools M&M Surtax receipts were about $529,000, and then in 22, in January, it was $550,000 is what we received for the full tax. So taxing entities who receive funding from the Surtax, as I said before, and I just wanted to emphasize, we're not given the opportunity to analyze the impact. That's my concern, is change may have been appropriate. We were not given the opportunity to analyze that, and so it's a real concern for us to make such a move. And again, I cited that it was set at 51 cents. So in analyzing further the things that I would encourage you and want you to be able to reflect on as a board is really we've planned for these dollars for the past 37 years, as have the other entities that I've talked about. The library board continues to need those resources, as do the health board, and I would presume other needs met throughout the county, whether by the city or by the road districts, are not too dissimilar. I fully acknowledge that the school system receives a very large portion of that, and that is very clear, and certainly a part of our budget. A reduction in revenue of this nature, and I really reflected on these words, and so I want to be clear. A reduction of revenue in this nature will be detrimental to the Lebanon R3 schools' short-term and long-term budget projections, and most certainly put the Proposition Lebanon schools planning at risk. And I say that because it was a key variable. We do not look short-term only. We project out long-term and consider all of these variables as a part of our decision-making. And so when we talk about budgeting for the 22-23 school year, you'll recall there were 4 major rocks, big rocks, that we budgeted around. And one was that staff pay would be competitive with area industry and school districts over 5 years, which next year is year 5. That we would make sure that we put students in safe buses, and we do that by buying newer buses, reducing the average age of buses as quickly as we can over a 10-year process. We plan that out over a decade because of the costs. You might also recall that we debated some about whether the salary increases would occur over 10 years, and the board was very interested in making sure our staff were taken care of. And so we pushed that to 5 years, fully knowing the stress that puts on the long-term budget. And then the other piece were a sustainable preventive maintenance process, so we don't end up having to tear buildings down because we can't take care of them because of deferred maintenance. So it is a big deal. Anytime we take a key variable off the plate in meeting the needs of our students, and I stand before you here to really want to just talk that out with you, and I do wish that we had the opportunity to have this discussion before the decision was made. The proposed reduction of the surtax to 51 cents would reduce the district's annual budget by $275,000 in its first year, and understanding that each year after that, that amount increases to upwards of $300,000, and you start to think about anywhere from $2.7 to $3 million in a 10-year period in revenues that are lost. And so it's going to be tied to assessed value changes. And I will tell you, those dollars were a part of our calculations for Proposition Lebanon schools. And so it goes without saying that the other entities that were a part of the system in 1985 will continue to have proportional loss in revenue. And I did and will continue to clarify that we do have a large portion of those funds. We have a very large service that we provide in the community. I have to emphasize that staff pay increases will continue. I want our staff to hear that through year 5 of Proposition 11 of schools because we've committed to that. But I will tell you that in our analysis over the long-range budget, that is a stress because what's important for any business is to maintain a healthy fund balance and to make sure that our fund balances don't get below a comfortable threshold. We had talked, and the upper teens was a point that the board was comfortable with in our decision when we pushed the salary increases for the current year. So we will continue to be able to focus and plan to focus for year 5 of Proposition 11 of schools. But as you can see in my notes, the rate of increase beyond that will be reduced with a surtax cut. We can't have a $275,000 to $300,000 reduction in operating revenue and make up that gap. That gap has to be made up. There has to be a reduction in expenditures to make that work. So we walked through a few scenarios. We could pause the purchase of buses for a year. And so I'll remind you that when we purchase buses, we amortize that out over 5 years. So anywhere from $60,000 to $70,000 a year. And again, comparing that to $275,000 to $300,000. If we don't purchase buses in a given year, that has a very minimal, if not negligible, impact on our capacity to continue on with the budgetary plan that we presented to you and on which Proposition 11 of schools was based. And I will also remind you that if we end up not purchasing buses, the entire 78 some odd buses will age 1 year. And so the celebration we have of this year reaching low 11s as an average, all the way from 14.6 to 11, in 1 year we'll lose a full year of aging on our buses. And so that certainly is a consideration. It would take many years of cutting in order to be able to have an impact. We could eliminate or reduce our facility improvement maintenance funds. So we currently this year allocate $215,000. That is a new dollar allocation that started with Proposition 11 of schools. And our patrons will notice all around our district asphalt that has been replaced, and they may not see the roofs unless they go in the building when it's raining and it's not leaking. We have been able to do so much and continue to do things to enhance and improve our facilities, so we stay in a preventive mode as opposed to a reactionary mode. Deferred maintenance is really detrimental, and that's what we dealt with, and that's the basis by which our voters voted when we shared the critical facility needs that we were in. And so, so savings in this category, we could do it. Certainly, a logical person would say, cut $215,000. You're almost at $275,000, but I would caution that decision for the reasons that I have on the slide. One, savings in that category don't keep pace. The $215,000 will never catch up to the gap. There would have to be other areas of gaps. I suppose we could cut buses and this preventive maintenance, and then reach upwards of a $270,000, $275,000. But the consequences of deferred maintenance will result in significant capital needs in the future. We'll be passing the buck on significant capital needs, and that's not a good idea, nor would I recommend it. What I will say is that the tax increases that certainly have been shared with me as maybe a precipitating factor behind why we might be seeking a reduction of this nature to maybe take off some of the load. I fully recognize that the tax rates our community voted for have increased everyone's tax rates or tax bill at the end of the year. But that's been shared by all community members, and it was approved by voters on August 7th of 2018 via Proposition 11 of schools. The proposed surtax reduction provides us a tax cut for commercial properties only. The vast majority of private taxpayers will see no benefit from a surtax reduction. The local economy, as I dialogue with the city, as I try to learn more about this situation, certainly is doing very well. You can see our Prop C numbers, the state revenue sales tax, things are going really well. Businesses are prospering. According to the city of Lebanon, less than 5% of commercial properties are vacant. In a recent meeting, even today, the downtown Lebanon, which is just celebrating great growth, is struggling to have enough space for budding businesses. Little evidence exists to suggest Surtax has had a negative impact on commercial growth in Laclede County. The community of Lebanon has been and continues to be very supportive of commercial growth and development via a variety of tax abatements, incentives, and they represent tens of millions of dollars. This board, I've kept you informed anytime any sort of an abatement or pursuit of tax credits has occurred, and the city has been a great partner to talk with us about kind of a planned effort, kind of thresholds for what levels they would be willing to provide, and certainly they're not a forever tax abatement. But as an entity that needs tax dollars to provide a great public educational experience, we can't. We get hurt when we stop receiving tax dollars, and so I think it's wonderful though that we partner with business and provide those incentives so that we can continue to grow as a community. I think it's an important fact to reflect on the fact that communication and collaboration about an issue of this nature has not provided the opportunity for adequate input from key stakeholders. I'm sorry that I was not able to have this conversation with you and discuss this publicly with you prior to the board meeting, prior to the decision to place it on the ballot. Nonetheless, it is on the ballot, and I wanted to provide that information for you. So, sorry, can you push me back one more? Sure, I hit all my slides. I think I did. So, I don't know that I could answer any questions. I pretty much told you everything I know and understand about the M&M surtax, but I would be happy to have dialogue or to just let you as a board engage in questions and discussion. Yes, sir.
Have you heard from any of our commercial businesses in the school district being taxed yet, if they're for or against this?
I have, and I have had numerous, and especially even smaller businesses that are totally, one business I talked to today said the bottom line for them was $600. And they were glad to pay that as part of their community support of the schools and the library and the health department. And they are happy to pay that as part of their overall taxes. That it was, and a larger corporation even called me and said that they totally support this surtax as just part of it. I mean, for me, I have been to all of the commissioners' meetings as well, and it is on the ballot. And I believe it's really important for the board to have a formal position and somehow come up with a resolution based on that, because we need to educate the voter. I made comments, as you referred to. I know you've given all of the history of the surtax. You've talked about the impact and those kinds of things. And I just want to reiterate some of what I said when I spoke to the commissioners in the beginning. And that was that the levy rate was appropriate in 1985 based on lost revenue, and it continues to meet the needs in 2022 because of inflation. The inflation impacts operating budgets for these entities that are affected by this surtax reduction. And, over the past 4 decades, critical services to the community has been supported by this surtax. And if the surtax is reduced or removed, these services could either no longer be provided, or the cost of those services will be passed on to other individuals in the community. And I think it's important that we come out together as a board to reiterate that the surtax is on commercial properties only, that the vast majority of Laclede County citizens will not receive a tax reduction. However, they will likely experience reduced services from the entities affected. And when I spoke to the commissioners, originally, one of the biggest things, and you alluded to it as well, but I'd like to just say it one more time, is that the challenge and key considerations related to the services represented among each of the entities receiving these funds, but also the reality that this reduction is not a one-time reduction, but rather year after year after year, and would likely never be replaced. And I think that's the heart of why we, for these reasons, I just think it's important that we take a formal position on this surtax.
I have a,
I was just gonna tell Bob, I have not had any commercial property owners come to me personally.
do we know why it went from $1.02 or $1.03 to 51 cents? Why it wasn't something in the middle, or we didn't discuss something in the middle?
We had no input.
I don't want to put words. I think it was really an evaluation of counties within our region and what their levy, their surtax levy rate was. And it varied throughout. So.
One more, and I know it's here, but so we were notified as far as the school district on Friday, the Friday prior to school starting on Monday, wanting to make us aware of this big change.
Yes, ma'am. I was notified on that Friday, the 19th, I think it was. We started school.
In the
22nd.
afternoon, and it would have been the Monday.
Correct.
So the voters are deciding. The commission decided to put it on the November ballot. The voters will decide.
Correct.
That is correct.
I think we need to commit to holding up Proposition 11 in schools regardless of what happens in November. I think if I did the math right, $275,000 is about half of 1% of our 53 million budget, and every little bit counts. I don't disagree with that, but I would challenge the administration to find other ways to tighten the belt versus pause the promises we made to this community that the operating levy passed in 2018. And I think surely with 0.5% of our budget, we can probably find other ways to cut that if it were to pass in November. But I don't want the staff to hear this tonight and panic and be fearful and stressed about the future. I think it would be, from my vantage point, really great if we could commit to keeping our promises before a Proposition 11 in schools, regardless of what happens on election day in November.
I think that it is really great to and we should and need to commit to those. But I'll just tell you that that 0.5% loss, if you want to apply it as 0.5% loss in the budget of this size into perpetuity, forever, it has when you talk about the law, or not the law, but the principle of just compounding interest, compounding numbers, the plan we presented to you and you approved on June 30th, it will not be able to be the same. There will have to be reductions. The lion's share of all increases that we have had, I'd say more than the lion's share, the increases we've had have gone to support buses and facilities and staff pay. We've had $7.7 million added to the budget, and we'll be approaching $10 million. Again, that is going to have a compounding effect into the future. $10 million added to staff pay and benefits. And so I would agree, we will make it work, but if you can't replace those dollars without removing something, and because it's an ongoing forever expense, it is going to be very difficult. And I don't want to scare our staff either. And we will be committed to Proposition 11 in schools, and we want to see year 5 happen. But we want to get there and then be able to stay there. And I'll tell you that to continue to provide, for one, it's going to be important for our staff to know that we won't continue to be able to provide 4% and 5% increases. I mean, we're going to get back to the real world with hopefully 2s and 3s for total increases, including steps. But there is the potential for a real challenge. And I wish I could say without a doubt, and I won't say that we can continue to do and stay in the competitive spot. We want to get there and stay there, and to lose those kinds of dollars puts that at risk. And that's not a scare tactic, that's just a fiscal fact that is there. One other variable that I would share is that the state funding levels are flat. We're in an environment, and I was in a meeting just today that talked about this scary bubble we're in from a fiscal standpoint, and the question of when that's going to burst. We're lenders are finding people to borrow, but how's that going to continue to be able to be paid? And I'm not trying to be Chicken Little, and I'm not a financial wizard to predict the future, but the economy is going to have a correction. And it would not be wise for us to allow our fund balances to even approach the levels they were in prior to Proposition 11 in schools. And any of the scenarios that Mr. Dammer and I walked through brought us to fund balance levels that we were not comfortable with whatsoever. And we would make sure we make those changes. And it would have to be in the most significant part of our budget, which represents 80% of our dollars, and that is how we can continue to provide increases into the future. So, yes, sir.
Well, I think there's one comment I agree with Mary on. One, we don't know if it'll pass or not, right? It's on the vote. And if we were, any kind of fund reduction that we could get as a public entity would be a negative, right, of any budget. And at the same time, the unknown that happen every year. We may get surprised with some extra funding. We may get surprised the state takes funding away and there's $1 million hit that we don't know is coming. I think those are the things that we have to do. But anytime there's a reduction proposed is this, I think it's obvious that when 100% of our funds are from tax dollars, that's a negative, right? But at the same time, it is up to the vote. And so I would agree. Me personally, as a representative of the board, I can't speak for the board. Me personally, I'm not for it because it takes away from what we want to do. But I also agree with Mary that the Proposition 11 of schools, those are options, right, that we'll have, where we need to cut, where we can cut, what funding we'll have in future years, what assessments we'll do, all those different variables. So I don't think it's wrong to take a stance that we're against this because we lose money as a district. At the same time, we don't know where the 275 will have to come out of. I know I think the Proposition 11 of schools promises can be kept. The 5-year salary, we're going to be able to do that, as you stated.
We will.
It's just going forward.
The buses, the maintenance things are somewhat fluid, can be more, even though they were part of that, and then another funding. So I'm with you. I think we already made that commitment back when we put it out there, and I think we continue that.
We have to keep that.
Yes, no matter what, where that comes. Now, the future years that you're talking about, it's going to have to come from somewhere.
Right.
Maybe there'll be a nice surprise somewhere else. Maybe the state will decide that inflation is real. And, I know the governor's been talking this week, about fully funding public education as a check mark in his box. But it being flat when everything is 8% inflation or whatever is, so I just think there's so many variables. I'm against it because it takes away money. If it was $1, I'd be against it. If it was 10 million, I'd be against it. Because we want to continue to make our district better. But where it has to come from in the future, I think will be this board or future board decisions.
Yeah. To Ms. Russell's point, we're not going to close the doors and we're not going to shut down. This isn't going to end the Lebanon Art through schools. And I don't want to send that message, but I think it's important for us to be really clear that those dollars are real dollars. They're not, even though you compare to a $50-some-odd million budget, and you say, well, how can $275,000 be a factor? And I shared with you some of the compounding factors related to that. But what we know now, it is not something that is a good thing for the school system. And my charge to myself was to make sure you fully understood the impact of the decision if voters choose to pass this. Certainly, the dollar amount of it would have been really good to be able to have a critical analysis of what that dollar, 51 cents, 75 cents, 80 cents, whatever it might have been. But we didn't get to do that. And so it's just important to be aware of the fiscal impact that we have. And yes, we will make decisions. You only approve one budget at a time. And we will adjust for that. it just, it's always gonna be a figure that we have, that won't be there. And, as we move forward, I just want you to be aware that, the plan we presented to you, was predicated on the variables we knew at the time. And,
And that was my point. I
Yeah.
think that'll continue to
Yes.
happen.
Agreed.
New variables will come, hopefully some positives along the way as well.
For me, my mind thinks ahead, and I would like for us to be able to talk as a board when I'm talking to people, or if people are asking me questions about this. So what can we do as a board? I would like to be able to say, because it does affect, I want to, be able to protect every revenue stream we have, and I want to be able to talk as a board. My understanding is we could do a resolution perhaps, or come up with some statement, some resolution, something that we could use when people are asking us questions, and we can, I know I speak as an individual, but I know the other entities will come up with their own things, but, is there something we can do to at least start working on, because the election is not that far?
Something that's clear that says a vote to cut this is a vote to cut funding. for
Well,
the
or just say
schools, for the
education,
libraries, for the-
no ballad language can tell the whole story on any issue.
This is a good,
And I would like to be able to tell this story, but I'd like to do it as a board. And if we don't educate the voter, who is going to, each entity is going to, but I would like to be able to do that as a board. That's just my personal feeling, is that I would like to be able to have we have this information that is, all the facts that we can share, but I just wonder if there is a resolution that we can do as a board. Perhaps to just start working on it, and then, here it is, the middle of September, and the election is the 1st of November, and we don't have a lot of time to.
And we can't necessarily campaign, right?
No, we can't campaign, but we can educate.
Making a statement of the facts
Yeah,
is what, kind of what.
right, I don't.
And I think the board can, to take your language, if you wish to have a resolution, then we can create a resolution, and the board can adopt that, can accept that, or endorse it, however you want to do that, and a position. Certainly we want to always stay within the confines of the law and what, as a public entity, can be communicated. So anything would be presented to our council to make sure that it was all above, in compliance with the law, and certainly not stepping across any lines related to campaigning. And but you are able to provide facts to the public in the form of a resolution, and the board can communicate in that a stance relative to the surtax.
so what does that look like?
Yeah,
Excuse me.
I guess that's something, is that something you could draft and we work on it, we approve,
Certainly, I could. Yes, I can work on.
because it, as you said, it has to go through the attorney, right?
Correct, to make sure that none of it
It's an
inappropriately
advocacy kind of thing.
utilizes or communicates, like I said, advocacy for a valid issue.
Yeah, I think we have to be careful. 'Cause
Yeah.
We as individuals can say what we think. If we're approached, we cannot communicate what the board thinks unless the board agrees on it.
That's, yeah.
This is, other than facts not shared.
Well, and I think that's what, if I understand what you're asking, is the board, a resolution can be drafted, and I'd be happy to do that. That even contains the facts that I've shared with you. And, pardon me, and then it could be presented to the board.
Keep it as something as simple as that, as what the facts are,
Right.
and no opinion.
Legally, we can't have an opinion other than,
Just private opinions or personal.
No, I do think the board can take a position. The board can communicate a position through resolution based on my dialogue with council.
Okay.
So the elected officials can have a position related to it. And so So in essence, the information or the facts that have been shared can be communicated in the form of, if you think about, I don't know that the language would be the kind of language you'd use, but oftentimes resolutions, sometimes boards will do resolutions relative to a legislative issue in Jeff City and take a position on that, and it might be a whereas this fact, and whereas that fact, and whereas this fact, therefore, the board resolves to, that sort of thing. I'm happy to work on something and then share it with you. But of course, before it would be anything that would be a formal resolution, the board would see it, would review it, would provide input, and then ultimately take action if they choose to. So I'm happy to work on a draft of that. Is the content of what I have here, what I presented to you, and what you have in your board packet related to the facts, are those adequate? Are there other items that you want to include? Other information that you want to exclude?
Yeah, in my opinion, yeah, I would keep it
Clear cut.
very clear and
Concise.
simple, yeah. Not a lot, a lot of this history and stuff was good for our education potentially, but.
Yes. Yes. Okay.
I would like to see you do that, I don't know. I think we don't have to adopt it, but at least,
Makes sense.
yeah, just to at least to get us going in the right direction so that, again, we're burning daylight when the election is not that far.
And I understand your purpose is to provide for what the board believes are to be facts related to the surtax that's on the November 8th ballot, and then to share the board's position on that. Okay. I will begin drafting that. Are there any other questions or comments for me? Thanks for your attention.